In Domain 1, we talk about transition planning. Within this domain, I am going to share examples of the development of a transition plan, how to measure compliance with IDEA, and student-centered planning. So what is transition planning? Transition planning is the process in which the IEP team develops a plan to help the student be successful following high school in employment, education, and independent living. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, outlines the necessary steps for transition planning under Indicator 13. According to the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition planning should be student-centered and student-driven. At the high school level, the IEP team continues to be comprised of the usual members: the general and special education teachers, the parents and the student, the LEA representative, and any related service providers relevant to the development of the IEP. However, for students with a transition plan, we add to the IEP team a representative for the agency that will be providing post-secondary services for that student. There is so much more than simply building the IEP team that schools need to consider. Schools should plan strategies to facilitate input from team members during transition planning. This includes the student, their family, their teachers, and anyone else on the IEP team who is familiar with the student's interests and strengths. Schools should also promote active involvement of culturally and linguistically diverse families before, during, and after transition planning meetings. In the article Transition Planning Involving Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Families, barriers that are typically placed on CLD families leads them to taking a passive role in transition planning. According to Landmark, Su, and Zhang, adults with moderate to severe disabilities worked more hours, earned higher wages, and lived more independently when their parents were moderately to highly involved in their transition planning process. For effective and results-oriented IEP meetings, schools should coordinate with transition planning meetings with stakeholders. Meetings should include community agencies that will provide post-secondary services for the student. This could include vocational rehabilitation, employers, service coordinators, or representatives from a university's Disability Support Services office. Understanding the federal requirements of transition planning is crucial to the development of effective IEPs. With the update of IDEA in 2004, transition services are defined as a coordinated set of activities for a child with disabilities that are results-oriented and are focused on improving academic and functional performance to better facilitate the student's movement to post-school outcomes. These updated requirements are described in Indicator 13. Indicator 13 states that transition plans are for youth aged 16 and above with an IEP that includes appropriate measurable post-secondary goals that are annually updated and based on age-appropriate transition assessment, transition services, including courses of study that will reasonably enable the student to meet those post-secondary goals, and annual IEP goals related to the student's transition service needs. There also must be evidence that the student was invited to the IEP team meeting where transition services are to be discussed and evidence that, if appropriate, a representative of any participating agency was invited to the IEP team meeting with the prior consent of the parent or student who has reached the age of majority. In the article, The Impact of IDEA Indicator 13 Compliance on Post-Secondary Outcomes, we learned that Indicator 13 compliance improves students' ability to identify appropriate post-secondary education options based on their interests and skills, and then succeed in post-secondary education. Research shows that student-centered planning is a strong indicator of successes following graduation for students with disabilities. With the updates to IDEA in 2004, student-centered planning is included in the requirements for transition planning. According to IDEA, transition planning should be based on the individual child's needs, taking into account the child's strengths, preferences, and interests. This means that through assessment, student-centered planning, and student-led IEPs, it is the responsibility of the school to make sure that transition planning process is driven by the student's interests and talents. In order to have a truly student-centered planning process, it is important to focus on the development of self-determination in students with disabilities. Self-determination means that the individual is the primary causal agent or person who makes things happen in his or her life. This is an important skill to have, and based on research, we know that self-determination facilitates intrinsic motivation, social development, and well-being. Students who are self-determined have more success following their graduation from high school.